This is Ed Driscoll for PJmedia.com, and we're talking today with Ben Shapiro of Breitbart.com and BenShapiro.com. He's the author of the 2013 book Bullies, How the Left's Culture of Fear and Intimidation Silences Americans, and the 2011 book Primetime Propaganda, the true Hollywood story of how the left took over your TV. And Ben, thank you for stopping by today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Ben, your latest book is Bullies. Today, the word liberal is still used far too often to describe the left in America. But how did liberals, the left, Democrats, progressives, and I'm making air quotes with my fingers as I use that word, become such bullies?
Well, I think that what's happened over the past 100 years is that the left, which always believed that people had to be coerced into doing their bidding, has become more and more egregious in their bully tactics, not just via use of government, but even in bullying individual citizens without the use of government. And the best way that they've discovered to get people to do things that they don't want to do is to try and humiliate them into it. So what the left has really focused on, particularly over the last few decades, is trying to paint everybody who disagrees with them as a vicious, racist, sexist, bigot, homophobe, bad people, right? We are all bad people. That's why you see, for example, in the last election cycle, Mitt Romney sort of made the case about Barack Obama, that Barack Obama was a good guy and a decent fellow who was not very good at being president, and Barack Obama basically made the case about Romney that he was the scum of the earth. And that's how the left wins elections, because they can't win on their own confidence. What they do win on is by claiming that anybody who opposes them is just a bad person on a fundamental level.
I assume, though, that President Obama and others on the American left don't actively think of themselves as bullies, do they?
No, I think that they think of themselves as fighters for righteous truth. And this is where living in an ivory tower has really helped the left. They live in these echo chambers, and so they truly believe what they say about politics is not opinion, it's fact. And so they're able to convince themselves that it's all right to slander people as racists without any evidence, because after all, the policies that they support aren't the policies that I support, and therefore they must be racist. President Obama has made that clear time after time. There's the Zimmerman case is a great example of this. And the left has yet to come up with a single shred of evidence that George Zimmerman was a racist. And yet the entire left has declared not only George Zimmerman to be a racist, but George Zimmerman to be an indicator that there is a broad-based and deep-seated American racism that still exists, just, again, without any sort of evidence. And everybody who thinks that George Zimmerman shot Trayvon Martin in self-defense, or at the very least that there was no convictable evidence there, is actually doing so out of this racism. Again, evidence-less is the symptom of everything that the left believes. If there were evidence to back up what they were saying, then they would use it, but they don't have it, and so they have to demonize anyone who opposes them.
Ben, this is kind of a long setup, so bear with me for a moment. But what I found fascinating about the Zimmerman trial is that it was really blue on blue all the way down. The judge was a Democrat. CNN reported that there was a potential black juror who was dismissed because he watched Fox News. So if that standard was applied to all of the women who wound up on the jury, then they were all liberal. George Zimmerman supported Obama in 2008, according to his brother in an interview at Breitbart.com. When Barack Obama took office in January of 2009, Newsweek declared, "We are all socialists now," and all of the people involved in this trial were. But when low-information liberal voters watched the news, they likely believed that Trayvon Martin, who Obama declared to be a surrogate son, was shot by a white conservative. How did this happen?
That's exactly right. Well, I mean, the way that it happened is that the left desperately looks for any sort of racial incident that they can find, and if they can't find one, they manufacture one. And in this case, they absolutely manufactured one. As you mentioned, George Zimmerman was a Hispanic Democrat. He somehow turned into a white conservative. And because of that, the left was able to somehow paint this as a case of white-on-black violence, and not only white-on-black violence, but racially motivated white-on-black violence. And it really was the greatest attempt by the press, certainly, I would say in my lifetime, to slander an innocent person in the name of their greater racial narrative. This is how the press sells papers. This is how the press makes itself feel good at night. What makes them feel good is to continue to perpetuate the myth that America is a deeply racist country, because so long as America is deeply racist, that means that we need massive government interventionism. Remember, a couple of weeks before the Zimmerman trial actually began, the Supreme Court struck down the law, the section of the Voting Rights Act that suggested that we should use standards from the 1960s in order to evaluate whether states were actually enacting racially biased voting laws. The Supreme Court said, look, this is not 1960 anymore. The left actually does believe that it is still 1960. The left thinks, and the aftermath of the Zimmerman trial is proof of this, the left truly, deeply believes that what would happen if Zimmerman got off is that lynchings would become the rage again. They believe that if the Voting Rights Act was struck down, then immediately states would begin banning black people from the polls. They have to believe that because it's the only way to justify massive government action, which is really the end that they're looking for. So that's how a case of, as you mentioned, blue-on-blue violence and really racial minority on racial minority violence turns into a case of a white versus black issue where a Hispanic guy kills a black guy and it's white people's fault.
Also, the blue-on-blue nature of the Zimmerman trial highlights something you discuss in at least a couple of your books. Primetime Propaganda was subtitled How the Left Took Over Your TV, and that was around the time that the left had taken over academia, and by the time of the 2008 election, Wall Street as well. And the U.S. military has become a tool for the left to implement their theories on sexual relations and even radical environmentalism. How can the right be so culturally impotent, and yet in the left's eyes, such bullies?
Well, I mean, I think that they're deeply connected. All of culture is about narrative. It's about storytelling. And the left is very, very good at storytelling. It's the only thing they're good at. They're not good at evidence. They're not good at policy. They're very good at telling a story in which they are the white hats and we are the black hats. And if you look at conservatives, all conservatives want to be Paul Ryan. They want to sit there and look like an accountant and explain the ins and outs of the latest CBO report. Democrats have no interest in that. They all want to be Jerry Bruckheimer, right, who happens to be a Republican, but they all want to be a bunch of Woody Allen types who are going to sit there and tell you a story that changes your mind on some issue or another. Well, what's funny is that when conservatives point this out, the left they get crazy. I mean, when Dan Quayle pointed out that Murphy Brown had changed minds about single motherhood, the left went completely nuts. When Candace Bergen, who played Murphy Brown, said a few years later that Dan Quayle was absolutely right, the left kind of shrugged. When people like me suggested that Will and Grace had a marked impact on how people think about gay rights in this country, people scoffed. Hey, that was these crazy right-wingers with their theories about propaganda. When Joe Biden said the exact same thing, the entire left nodded along. The left understands exactly what it's doing in terms of narrative. That's why these stories matter. That's why the Zimmerman story was a story. The story mattered. If the left had to go to statistics, if the left had to reveal, for example, that 6,600 black people are killed every year and 93% of those are killed by other black people, that doesn't help their case. If the left had to reveal that 4 times as many white people are killed by black people as black people are killed by white people every year, that would not help their case. Statistics, evidence, proof, those things don't help the left. What helps the left is stories that frighten people. It's the kind of stories that make Melissa Harris Perry talk about how when she tucks her kids in at night, they're crying because they're afraid that someone like George Zimmerman is going to stalk them and kill them in the streets, despite the fact that any black kid in America has a much higher chance of being killed by another black person than by a white person. So all that matters for the left is story. And the truth is, most people, left and right, think in terms of story. This is why Reagan was so popular for people on the right. He's the only president in the last 100 years for Republicans who really knew how to tell a story. And that was an amazing skill. Most Republicans don't know how to tell a story, and because they've been shut out of the culture so long, they tend to not only ignore the culture, but denigrate the culture as though it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what happens in the movies. It doesn't matter what happens on TV. All of that's frivolous. What really matters is this latest Heritage Foundation report. Well, no. I mean, what really matters to the vast bulk of the American people is what they watched on Big Bang Theory that night.
I was living in New Jersey at the time, so I vividly remember when Al Sharpton originally burst onto the local New York political scene in the mid to late 1980s, first on the Morton Downey Jr. show, and then ginning up the Tawana Brawley incident. Over 20 years later, in 2011, MSNBC President Phil Griffin told NPR, quote, "I'm a big fan of the Reverend Sharpton. I've known him quite a bit. He's smart, he's entertaining, he's experienced, he's thoughtful, he's provocative. All of the things I think that MSNBC is," unquote. How did somebody like Sharpton, who's one of the ultimate bullies, rehabilitate his reputation to the point where he first became a power broker in New York City politics, then a Democrat presidential candidate, and now the thoughtful, provocative, entertaining, all-around swell guy who's all the things that MSNBC is?
He never had to rehabilitate himself. Remember, the left never cared about Tawana Brawley. As soon as the Tawana Brawley case exploded, it disappeared from the newspapers. Nobody ever followed up to see whether Sharpton personally paid out, which, of course, he never did. He had all of his supporters pay the Tawana Brawley settlement. So It was the same thing with Duke Lacrosse. Duke Lacrosse was another case where Sharpton got himself involved and really pilloried a bunch of innocent people, and people who were idiots, but people who were innocent. And, you know, the fallout was never blamed on Sharpton. He did the same thing in the Zimmerman case as well. Al Sharpton's been able to get away with it because in this country, the narrative that the left has bought into, what makes people feel good on the left, really at the root, what makes people feel great on the left is a sense of unearned moral superiority. It's all they care about. They wake up in the morning, and a lot of them can't point to accomplishments. A lot of them can't point to things that they've done that are worthwhile, but they can point to you, and they can say, well, at least I'm not you. You know, you're the bad guy. I'm the good guy. Well, the same thing applies in race relations. White people on the left look at Al Sharpton, and because they have this unearned sense of white guilt, that grants the guilt actually grants them superiority. It's an unearned sense of moral superiority. They look at other white folks and they say, well, you know, you're racist, but I'm not racist. You know how I'm not racist? Because I look at Al Sharpton and I see a really good guy. That's it. That's my proof that I'm not a racist, right? And my proof that I'm not a racist is that you're a racist. And so that's how Al Sharpton has been able to get away with this race hucksterism for years upon years upon years upon years, even as the black population sinks deeper into really unemployment, into misery, into higher levels of unwed motherhood. If you look at the black community when Al Sharpton really came to prominence versus the black community now, they're significantly worse off than they were 35 years ago. The next generation of the black community is less educated than the last generation was, and they're less educated, and that generation is less educated than the generation before that. And that's an increasing problem, and that's a problem that continues to be ignored on a regular basis by folks on the left because, again, it's not important to solve problems. It's only important to feel good about yourself, and the way you feel good about yourself is by ignoring problems and blaming other people for the problems that you know black folks encounter in this country.
Ben, as I mentioned a few moments ago, in January of 2009, the left openly announced to the world, "We are all socialists now." James Carville predicted a 40-year uninterrupted rule by the left in D.C. Then 5 minutes later, the Tea Party showed up as an antidote to such monolithic thinking. How badly did their appearance on the national scene unnerve the left?
Oh, well, the Tea Party has completely destroyed the confidence of the left. That's why the left has to claim that we're a bunch of radical crazies who are anarchists, in essence. They try to claim that people who are libertarian are not actually libertarian, they're actually anarchists. And that's what... You know you're doing something right when the left calls you radical. The left never called John McCain a radical because John McCain never did anything right. The left tried to label Mitt Romney a radical. That was probably the least successful portion of their campaign because he's not a radical. The left is labeling the Tea Party radical because they have to paint the Tea Party somehow. That's why they call them racist. That's why they call them sexist, bigot, homophobes. It's the only way the left knows. The left only has 3 lines of attack. None of them are attacks based on evidence. There are 3 lines of attack on any politician and really on any person, are that you are corrupt, mean, or stupid. Those are the 3 lines of attack. And every single politician, every single movement falls along those lines. So if you look at the Tea Party, what the left claims about the Tea Party is that it's 2 out of 3. They don't claim that the Tea Party is corrupt because it's difficult to claim that the Tea Party is corrupt. Instead, what they claim is that they're mean and stupid. They have a tough time with stupid because the fact is there are a lot of smart people who are members of the Tea Party, although they try to claim that people like Sarah Palin are dumb. But they do get some ground on the mean issue, mainly because the media tries to paint the right as mean. The fact is this, you know, Andrew Breitbart, who is one of my mentors, Andrew used to say that the media is everything. The media is everything. The media is the only thing that matters in this country. It's worth 10 points to the Democrats in every election cycle. It's worth 10 points to the hard left in every election cycle. That's how you can have a dramatically unsuccessful, incompetent, truly horrible president undermining American principles get reelected in a landslide. That only takes place because you have a media that is monolithically chanting the same narrative over and over. Tea Party bad, Democrats good.
Ben, as we get near the end of the interview, I have to ask you the obvious question. In January, you refused to knuckle under Piers Morgan's attempt at bullying. Could you talk about how you prepared for that and how you fought back?
Yeah, I mean, the easiest way to fight back against the left is to debunk the tactics that they use in front of them. Everything the left does is a magic show. It's all misdirection. They don't want to argue evidence. They want to argue story. So what you do is you take that away from them in the first 30 seconds of a debate. Every debate is won first 30 seconds. So in the first 30 seconds of that debate, I knew what Piers' tactics were because I'd seen him do it repeatedly. And that was to demonize everybody who opposed him as, you know, somebody who didn't care about the kids of Sandy Hook. After all, if they did care about the kids of Sandy Hook, then they would agree with him on gun control. So I simply said that, and it sort of caved him in. I mean, once I said to Piers, look, you're standing on the graves of the kids of Sandy Hook to push your agenda. We all agree that kids shouldn't be killed. We're just trying to figure out the best way to accomplish that. Please stop being a jackass. Everybody recognized the truth of that statement. Everybody loves the magic show until somebody explains how the trick is done. Once you know how the trick is done, then the magic sort of falls away. What's truly amazing about President Obama is that the Republicans have refused to call out his tricks. They keep falling into the same trap over and over and over, and it doesn't matter what the issue is. On immigration, for example, the Republican Party never should have gotten into this battle on immigration in the first place. They should have said to President Obama, look, we know what you're doing here. You don't care about illegal immigrants. You really don't. If you cared about illegal immigrants, you would have done something about them in your first term. Everybody knows that you're grandstanding here in order to pillory us as bad people. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to pass two separate bills. The first bill is we're going to pass a border security bill right here, right now. You sign it, and then we'll start talking about Bill Part 2. Otherwise, this is a non-starter. And that's not because we don't like Hispanics. We love Hispanics. It's not because we don't like immigrants. We love immigrants. But the fact is, everyone in the country agrees that we have to secure everyone, Democrat, Republican, Independent. We all agree we have to secure the border first and then deal with the people who are here. If you continue to grandstand, we're going to continue to call you out for it. The problem is the Republicans will never call Obama out. They keep assuming good intentions, and he's just bad at his job. He's not bad at his job. He's very good at his job. His job is to paint Republicans as mean and nasty. That's his only job. He doesn't have to be good at anything else. The same thing is true on Obamacare. On the Obamacare debate, that debate never should have come down to who cares more about the people of America. We all care about the people of America, supposedly. I mean, they pretend to anyway. So instead of you going out there and saying that you care more, and if we cared more about uninsured people, we would just do what you want us to do about it. Why wouldn't we go out? What we should have said is we should have said, look, here's how we're going to deal with the uninsured problem in America. We're going to lower the cost of medical care. We're going to lower the cost of medical care by making it easier for doctors to get into the business. The easiest way for doctors to get into the business is to remove burdensome regulation. You don't care enough about doctors to actually let them get into the business. You want doctors to have to expend $250,000 in order to become doctors. You want to make sure that doctors are paid less than what they're worth because you're selfish and because you're a socialist and because you want to redistribute everybody's income so it makes you feel good. None of that is going to take care of the uninsured. We're unwilling to do that because we want to be perceived as nice folks. And this is, as long as we want to be perceived as nice folks, we're going to continue to lose because the great irony of all this is the nicer we are, the meaner the American people think we are.
And last question. Whoever the GOP's presidential candidate in 2016 and his advisors are, do you think that they'll finally figure out how to best the left-wing bullies?
No. The typical GOP establishment is not ready for this battle, right? You have folks like Karl Rove, who's firmly convinced that the way that you win elections is not by painting yourself against an enemy. The way that you win elections is by painting yourself as a nice person. It is impossible in this life to paint yourself as a nice person. Ask anybody who's ever broken up with a girlfriend. No matter what you say to your girlfriend after you break up with her, she's going to think you're a jerk, right? And then the same thing is true with the American people. The American people have broken up with conservatism. You're not going to convince them that conservatism is the way to go by being really nice. The way that you're going to convince them that conservatism is the way to go is because this is a two-party system, and we can paint the other side as mean and nasty as they are. And they're mean and nasty, and they're horrible people. I mean, they truly are. These are the same people who have for 3 generations kept the black community in absolute poverty and educational inequality. This is the same group of people who have stood by and watched millions of babies be aborted. These are the same in the name of free sex. I mean, really, if you took the agenda of 1950s Mad Men and put it next to the agenda of 1990s feminists, they are indistinguishable. They are exactly the same. But until we are willing to say that sort of stuff, until we are willing to go on offense and question the motives of the people who have done this, we're going to continue to lose. At a certain point, ignorance becomes sin. We're now 60 years into this great experiment known as the liberal takeover of the United States, and the United States is much worse off for it. It's about time for us to call these folks out, because if we don't, we're going to continue to lose.
This is Ed Driscoll for PJmedia.com, and we've been talking with Ben Shapiro of Breitbart.com and BenShapiro.com. He's the author of the 2013 book, Bullies: How the Left's Culture of Fear and Intimidation Silences Americans. It's published by Simon & Schuster and available from Amazon.com and your local bookstore. And Ben, thank you once again for stopping by today.
Hey, thanks so much.